what I come across all the time, right, just as a bit of an intro, is this talk about for advertising to work, it has to be emotional. For your marketing to work, it has to tap into emotions. And if it's not emotional, it doesn't work. And there's varying degrees of that sort of argument, right? And some see it as kind of like the key to getting advertising messages or creative through to people's brains and then influencing them to purchase. And then I was doing some research around this topic, and I come across some of your articles on Forethought and some of your LinkedIn articles, and I was like, oh wow, this is really interesting. So that's the reason why I reached out. So thanks for your time. Number one,
Not at all. Not at all.
like I know you from your Kmart turnaround story, which I think is fascinating. You're highly recommended for some people that I know are very good at what they do. Can you just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, Ken Roberts. I've been involved in marketing research for 35 years. I started a company called Roberts Research Group, which became Forethought 30 years ago. And our whole focus, John, the whole way along has been to explain changes in market share. And once we can learn how to explain the changes, we can alter them. And so we've been trying to deconstruct the drivers of human behaviour. And we did, I think, a pretty fair job understanding the rational drivers. And the company for a good 25 years really focused on what are the rational drivers. And the whole focus on emotion, I mean, I know a lot of your viewers weren't even born in the mid 1990s, but actually that's as recent as emotion is. You know, like the first symposium into neuroscience looking at emotion and decision making was in the mid 1990s. And really, even today, marketing texts are not great in this field. So I might just give you a little bit more history. So an academic from University of Southern California, Antonio Damasio, really weirdly has never won the Nobel Prize for science. He's published extensively. And he came across this important point, John, which was that this was a black and white statement. He said, we cannot decide without emotion. And the basis of him deciding that was that he had patients that had brain lesions that made their emotional processing ineffective. So they only had their cognitive processing. And the first time he developed this theory was he noticed that a patient was leaving his practice and was making their next appointment, and they were continuously ruminating at reception about when should their next appointment be. And he just observed that they couldn't decide without this emotion. So that was his hypothesis. He built on it, and now it's part of our science that we need this detonation for behaviour. And so brands need to understand in consumption what is the emotion. And there's some really unusual ones, like in banking for mortgages, it's love. And you would wrongly interpret that if you were thinking love of the bank. No, it's I'm taking out a mortgage, and the reason I'm doing it is because of my love of, I don't know, of my family's, say, you know, another room for the next child or whatever. But the emotion is most associated with behaviour relating to mortgages, for not investment mortgages but for primary homes, is love. Therefore, the banks should associate themselves with that emotion as having the capability of fulfilling that emotional need, if you like, and best associating their brand with that emotion. So the question that you asked, which is the really brilliant question, is about, well, how compulsory is emotion in every communications? And this is a really big issue. And at Forethought, we sense that the market has largely got this wrong. The reason we feel that is because Binet and Field have made it more difficult in the way that they've classified brand building from performance marketing. And so what has happened there is that there's a lot of creative agencies, and may I say, some of them have recently been terminated from their big brands, where they've convinced the client that they should be doing brand building now, and that's long form marketing communications, and at some time in the future that will result in actual behaviour. And what so we've done a lot of work where we've tracked individual respondents, and we've looked at those big brand building, what we call the emotional anthems, and we've looked at their performance, and we've looked at the individual respondents, and have they actually seen the performance marketing. So the idea about this long and the short of it is that you get the whole thing eventually. That I show you the big brand building emotional anthem, and then later on I show you the activate now, come and get it kind of performance marketing. And what we've been able to see is that in following respondents through, it's not unusual to see 5% of respondents actually saw the ad, linked it to the correct brand, got the message, this is for brand building, and then got the same for performance marketing. So our strongly held contention, and in fact it's in 3 different places in Binet and Field's seminal 2011 document, they actually say, I know it's old, right? But they say that you're better off doing both at once. So our contention is that when you do marketing communications, you should have an emotional activation, or a primer for behaviour. You should have a quality promise, and you should have a price promise. And we call that the triple play. And time again, we've seen organisations that have been able to change their market share by working at that. The thing about emotion, though, John, is that it takes much longer to establish a neural pathway between the emotion and the brand. So the reason to believe the cognitive quality driver and price drivers, they're much faster. So our findings have been that you can re-educate the market in as little as 6 months on a price offer. If you want to educate the market about a quality offer, you want to reposition your brand from being, say, middle quality to top quality, 18 months, 24 months is kind of realistic to make that change, to not burn up in the zone of cynicism. But of course, emotion doesn't go through a cognitive filter. So if you're effective at marketing communications, then you will go straight through to emotion. But the time that it takes to build the linkage, the neural pathway between an emotion and a brand, could be years. You can do reasons to believe in campaigns, but for emotion you have to choose the emotion, and you need to stick with it in perpetuity.
So whatever emotion that you chose, so you can't like swap it up every year or two with a new piece of creative, whatever. It has to be consistent. Yeah.
You need to keep the theme of the emotion. So if you like, going back to that mortgage example, then you're just constantly leaving the emotion around love. But you can be changing the rational. The rational offer might be a credit card with no fees associated with this mortgage. Or next month it might be a cashback offer of $10,000 if you take a more. So you can be rotating the cognitive, but all the way along you're keeping the same emotional activation.
Yeah. Okay. So then a question to you is: some people think that if the key is emotion in ads, therefore, and I always say to them, if you just have a pure rational sort of messaging in your advertising and all your communications, does that mean it won't work? And they kind of can't answer that. So what would your answer be to that?
It really depends. So, and I'm not going to avoid the question, but we have about 12 years of data in practically every category, and in Asia, Australia, and North America. And the importance of emotion really varies tremendously. So, first time mums buying their first diapers, it's 70% emotion. And then the 30% is almost all about leakage protection. So that is a super emotional category of love, and the emotion is love. Then you go across to, say, the other end of the spectrum is topping up your prepaid mobile phone. And that is only 5% emotion and 95% rational. But still, the important point is it is still 5% emotional. So you still need to have some element of emotion. And that goes to the point that even in performance marketing, You need to have that emotional detonator.
But hang on, my counter argument to that is that is it possible for humans to be unemotional anyway? You know what I mean? Like, I think there's two things here. It's like, is your communications trying to trigger your emotion or not? Is the first thing, right? And then, does it actually trigger some emotional response in the respondent? Yes or no? That's like another step, right? And then, is the person responding, the third thing, yeah, purchasing or thinking differently or whatever you want them to buy into, are they acting because of that communication, yes or no, or is it because of other triggers or other beliefs that are already in their brain? You know what I mean? Like, there's like a triple whammy here that I think of assumption that some people say that, hey, this is how advertising works. It's emotional. That emotion will be interpreted correctly, therefore will lead to a purchase. I'm like, that's a that's a three-step process almost. Like, do you need it? Is it essential?
It's essential. Because what you're raising there is this idea about attribution modelling. And you're asking, can I actually attribute the change in performance with the actual lift in emotion? And the answer is 100% yes. So this has been distilled into what we call prophecy, thoughts and feelings, which is an explanatory model of behavioural change. So we have industry super clients, we have aviation clients where the correlation between the predicted change in market share and the actual change, I'm saying change now, not some sort of linear, extrapolation, but actual changes, that the correlation is like zero point 0.8 or better. And so you see a lift in emotional performance and you see a lift in market share. And the explanatory power of those models is irrefutable. They've been published in refereed journal articles. Forethought's been published in refereed journal articles a number of times. These models they have face validity, John. So our clients that are deep users of this methodology don't question. They can see the performance, the change in share, the change in inbound inquiries and so on, aligning with the change in the prosperity of the brand. See, the problem starts, John, when most brand trackers don't measure brand.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I did a whole course on this, like a crash course on it, and I was researching it. Like, I released it for free, just as an educational thing. And I noticed like a lot of brand trackers don't get the category right, number one. So it's like this assumed very sort of boxy category that some finance person is like, a toothbrush is a toothbrush. When it comes to services, it can bleed into so many categories. So then you got multiple purchase kind of CEPs or purchase triggers that you kind of need to like replicate the question for if it's like unaided, yeah. And then yeah, and then yeah, they don't really like test. Like, again, it's like I can be aware of the brand, but like, do I want to buy it or do I have an incumbent purchase brand that's preferred? Like, there's a huge gulf between the two.
100%. The major global leaders in brand measurement have got a single brand measurement device and they don't have the category drivers. So instead, they have likability, and what we call made up measures. And any number of studies have shown that they have no relationship with actual in-market performance.
Like preference consideration, I think, like, I know Ritzen's like big on those. He has it in his brand measurement course. I was like, hang on, like, I know the correlation between those is really weak, and then like, does that translate to sales or not? You know what I mean? Like, they're very slippery sort of metrics because they may, like, they're about stated behavioral intent instead of actual behavior. There's a huge gulf between the two for me.
100%. Here's the thing: you do a explanatory model of what drives consumption behaviour in a category, and emotion, as we talked about, will vary from maybe 70% to 5%. The two examples that we spoke about before. There's a plethora of drivers, and so you can't choose all of them. You have to choose, you have to develop campaigns based on a couple of them. And there's some input into that. For example, what's your relative performance? You can't start claiming something that you're not any good at. And the market knows that you're not any good at it. That sort of cynicism filter is really highly tuned and increasingly highly tuned with consumers. So you have to make a choice about what you're going to talk about. And the way that the brain works, and Kahneman was really important in this area because he talked about the effortful process of cognitive, and so the consumers take shortcuts. So if you know what the hierarchy is of drivers and you choose one of the most important drivers that you're performing well at, and that you are talking about that, the consumer will infer that you're good at other elements of the mix. So you have to make a strategic choice about which emotion, which rational drivers you want to stand for or be famous for.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. You're talking about Daniel Kahneman, right? From the book Thinking Fast and Slow, isn't it? I think where the system one and two sort of comes from, and you're kind of mentioning their shortcuts and heuristics, or
Yep.
right, which is essentially kind of what a lot of people are trying to do with brand. It's like
Yep.
we want that brand to be like, so you don't have to go through this like really big cognitive load, like trying to decide between options, right? It's just like, well, I know that brand, I trust them, they're associated with that category, therefore I'll buy them. Interesting though. There's this company there's a lot of companies that do creative pre-testing. So if you're going to spend a lot of money into a creative campaign, a lot of the time it's like an expensive television commercial, right? There is this idea that, hey, we can test this before it goes to market just to make sure that it's worthy and that it will do what we want it to do. There is one company in particular in the UK that's quite big that a lot of people are talking about. What is your sort of thoughts on creative pre-testing?
Well, um, it's really different by country. So in the US, we would have clients that would do 60, 70, 80 pre-tests a year. Those clients are spending more on media than one of the major banks in Australia's whole advertising budget. So they pre-test, and the cost of pre-test for them is insignificant.
Like a rounding error.
It is, and in fact, you remember, you think about how much, say, a brand like L'Oreal spends on its marketing communications, and it's billions and billions of euros, versus an ad budget for a bank in Australia. So in Australia, pre-testing is becoming more popular, definitely, and it is victim of the same drawbacks that brand trackers are, and that is that it's frequently made up measures. So what they try to do is they try to use this sort of star rating to give. So give you a great example. We were working with a brand, Stouffer's, which is the largest. It's a Nestle brand in the US, and it's the largest frozen food brand. And we've got the research findings. We're in with the strat planners and the creatives, and they're storyboarding an ad. So they're using. It's mandated to use Ipsos as their pre-test. So they finish the storyboard and they go out to this guy who's probably my age now. This is a few years ago, but he'd be my age, so. And he looks at the storyboard and he says, "You need a cheese pull." So what that is that the fork goes into the meal, comes out, and the cheese drags behind it. This is for lasagna, and sure enough, they send it into the pre-test, and it comes back, and so these people are working out how these pre-tests work, and there's not necessarily a great correlation between how those pre-tests work and actual in-market performance. So recently, the biggest organisation in the world that does pre-test recently announced that 76% that got the top star rating for the pre-test did well in market. Now, you explain that to the CMO, that 25% of cases or 24% of cases, you got a good pre-test result back, but the ad failed. It's not really like saying that that's a good result. It's not that much better than a flip of a coin.
Yeah. Yeah, that means what, 1 in 4 is going to fail.
1 in 4 that they say is going to succeed fails.
Well, this is the thing. It's like there's a big gulf. They did this test. I'm not sure if we're talking about the same company, but anyway, it was a very highly rated star test, right? For the Australian tourism campaign. The last one with this little hopping kangaroo called G'day or something, right? And it tested really, really well. I was looking at the short-term visitor arrival numbers, which ultimately would be the case of, your tourism campaign working would be short-term visitors into your country, right? Not migrants or whatever. And we're back to 2016 levels, yeah, in terms of like it was peaking and sort of growing quite predictably until COVID hit, and then it sort of bottomed out, obviously, which is like you can't control for that. But it hasn't risen back to where it was before. And I was talking to a couple of people about this, and we had a couple of hypotheses why. There's a lot of practical barriers to come, like from other parts of the world to this island in the middle of nowhere, right? Which is pretty expensive as well to visit, and the time zone differences. The airlines are quite expensive. The ticket here relative to other destinations that could offer similar experiences, with beaches and outback or whatever. So there's just some rational, logical reasons why short-term visitor arrivals might be down. So great ad, probably testing well and probably in market affecting people. But like again, are they going to buy or not? There's a big leap for me there.
You're right, John. But those impediments are a constant. And the biggest impediment is that Americans, the lower level Americans, not the executives, the lower level Americans only get like 14 days annual leave. So take out 3 days, like it's 25 hours door to door to commute from New York to Melbourne, or Sydney or Queensland.
And then you got jet lag, which is like takes another day or two of your trip. So you're basically like losing 5 days.
Yeah, yeah. But those rational reasons, those impediments are a constant.
Yes.
So your point, I love your point about let's look at visitation. There should be a relationship between the ad testing well and visitation. And if there's not, then we need to look at the ad test. We need to ask ourselves, is it actually measuring the drivers of behaviour? How do we get these 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars? And by the way, if the way because we were going to talk about emotion, we haven't talked about it a lot. The emotion is a massive factor here, and the method that you're talking about uses a methodology based on Paul Ekman's classification of emotion and things like disgust, and it doesn't measure emotions like pride. And so the biggest emotion, so if you talk about Kmart and other clients, the biggest emotion that we find in marketing communications that is effective is pride.
Yeah. So it's like status related to the ego and yourself and your standing.
Individual pride, it could be collective pride.
Yeah. Okay.
But that method that you're talking about
Doesn't have that in it.
it measures Paul Ekman's stuff from the 1960s.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
There's a massive buyer beware here, and there's no real relationship between the quality of the pretest and the market share of the organisations doing pretest.
Actually, very funny. I mentioned Ritzen, who blocked me a while ago for questioning some things on social media. Anyway, it's not an isolated case. I was then in a documentary called Making a Marketer. These Czech people who have a marketing festival over there wanted to interview me in Sydney. So anyway, I went down to Sydney and was chatting about some things. So I'm in I'm in this documentary with like that person and someone else, both of who blocked me, and then Byron Sharp's in there as well. And yeah, it was just it was a very funny thing. And they're like, "Oh, you're actually more rational than you are on social media. Like you're a bit more feisty on social media." I'm like, "Yeah, well, I have to talk to like reasonable people. Like, in real business, you can't be like that." So
Ritson is the most important marketer in the world at the moment. And the reason for that is because he has replaced Philip Kotler. So Philip Kotler developed an encyclopedia of marketing, and most marketing students have used that book. There's been no one since Kotler who has tried to embrace the entire marketing literature and try and piece together what is best practice. And Mark is inevitably not going to get everything right, but he's trying to curate for marketers where they should be going to for their knowledge. And for that reason, he's performing a massive service. Byron Sharp is an entirely different category.
You said that very very eloquently. Yeah, so I mean, if I had to speak about both people, there's Scott Galloway, who's a bit of a mouthpiece, more in that sort of tech because he's quite close with Kara from Recode. I find him quite big, and Seth Godin quite big as well. I don't mind either what they talk about as well because it's somewhat practical, and simplified, which I think we can get caught up in all these technicalities, but like, forget these like very simple sort of drivers of purchase. Mark's taken a lot of the existing literature from, 101 intro to marketing courses from Monash and rehashed that, done quite well out of it. So I suppose that's validation. The thing I find with Sharp, and, I'm open to criticism here, is that this pursuit of truth sometimes clashes with political realities, right? So, like, I think they're quite worried about being right to the detriment of being practically useful sometimes. I know when I've had these discussions in boardrooms or whatever, like, half the time it's just like the opinion of the senior person kind of goes in the face of scientific evidence, like, quite often, and more often than I think would be admitted by them. That's my issue with their work.
Yeah, I think if you think about it slightly differently and say there's a continuum, and on one end of the continuum is right, and on the other end of the continuum is rich, and there's folks tend to be moving along there, but the idea about tech in marketing is it's everything. It is everything. If this the Gen AI wave, if you're not on it, then you're in deep trouble. And what we're seeing with Gen AI is the development of creative straight from marketing research. And that's what we're doing. We've got a business called brandcoms.ai that's doing that. And
Okay.
it is dramatically reducing the length of time for creative concepts, dramatically reducing the time or the cost associated with creative agencies charging on a time basis.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and the fact about Gen AI is that it's like a ratchet. Once you educate it and you keep educating it,
It gets
it
better.
keeps it just keeps getting better. It doesn't take a day off.
But of course, it's threatening people's jobs as well, So, and the traditional way of doing things, like thinking of that scene in Moneyball at the end have you seen that movie, Moneyball, or not?
Oh, mate, that is an important movie.
Yeah,
And
right. It's so important. Like, I mean, he's a great writer. Michael Lewis, I think it is. He writes many good.
yes, it is. Yeah, he wrote about Kahneman.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, exactly. But he writes about the same things about this human behavior, and then it's basically sales. This is the current sort of like line in a lot of his books, and the infallibility of like human behavior, and in the face of like logic sometimes.
Where it's going, Bud, is that if Gen AI can produce a creative, and it can, and it does outstandingly well, we've got so many pre-tests to show how it's performing against other work. We've got a client that the last Gen AI creative concept tested the best of anything they've done since 2020. So that's kind of that order of magnitude in terms of creative. So you're developing creative for a market, for a segment, but actually the capability is for the individual. The Adobes of this world will progressively move to using Gen AI to develop a creative for John, and that's where it's heading.
You mean
And
like one to one, so every single person will get their sort of own sort of tailored? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like kind of
yeah,
like a Blade Runner, right?
mass personalization is where the tech is going. You mentioned Scott before, and where he thinks the tech is going. That's where the tech is going.
Yeah, the traditional way of doing it was like you hire a big agency, a reputable agency that's done really good work before, and then you spend like 6 months and $1 million creating this, like putting all your eggs in one basket, creating this TVC that then gets cut down into social media and digital or whatever, right? And then everyone's like sort of incentivized to hopefully make that work, and then half the time it doesn't work because for whatever reason, and then you repeat and rinse and repeat and lather again and again and again, and I find like that process takes like a year sometimes to come to fruition. I'm like, you could have tested that and put it in market or created digitally and like got a good signal and then maybe invested in a year. Like
Absolutely.
it's weird.
I could not agree more. Yeah. And Gen AI, it's taking us 14 days from brief to creative concept, and and if the client doesn't like it, it's taking us about 14 hours to give them the next lot.
Wow. Okay, there you go.
And it's infinite. So we're using synthetic data to take the top best ideas and work out which of those ideas best fits what we call the content store, which is the client's brand cues and the category
Yep.
cues. And emotion is
Yep.
part of that, by the way.
Okay, so kind of what can you talk about which brands are kind of using that, or sort of give some credence to that that process
I
that
can't
people
I
maybe.
can't tell you
Okay,
which brand is
let's just
using it.
say
There's three
large
brands in the US that are using it. They're category
successful
leaders. They're
brands.
outgrowing the category. One of the restaurant brands is outgrowing the category. Yeah, so they're very large. In Australia, we're still largely in the development stage of it's still being handed to the creative agency. And the creative agencies are still giving the predicted response of we can do better. And our response to that is fantastic, fantastic. Let's go, because John, the biggest failing is the handover, right? The biggest failing has been the marketing research to the brand owner and the brand owner to the creative agency. And then work coming back and the brand owner having this secret language that they don't use, they don't talk to the creative much about, but they have words like off brief, off strategy.
Off brand or something.
Yeah, yeah. And that's them saying they didn't interpret the brief properly. So that's been an
Yeah.
age old problem. And what about if we, marketing research agencies or brand owners, what if we thought maybe it was our problem instead of their problem? What if we communicated to them graphically, which is how they communicate? What are we showing them tables for? I mean, I love creative folks, and my daughters are creative, but most of them got out of math in year 10. Like, let's be, and why are we showing them, tables, and why are we showing them
Yeah.
graphs, and when we could be showing them animatics or creative concepts Gen AI produced that say, this is the research findings. Go and do better. Go and do better.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so just in summary then, emotion is important for affecting behavior, yes?
Foundational.
Yeah, foundation. Okay.
Foundational.
But in summary, you need to get the right emotion that is relevant to affecting that purchase behavior. Otherwise, you're just doing emotions for emotion's sake, basically, right?
Exactly
Yeah,
right.
okay, cool. Okay, and then to find that out, yeah, obviously that's relative. So some other brands may be over-indexing on that emotion and doing really well, so they're associated with that. So if you're a direct competitor, then it's kind of like figuring out, kind of like a CEP, which one you can kind of dominate more and then grow out from there, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Then what would you say? Again, I'm not into this false dichotomy between brand and performance. I think it's like a dumb argument. It's like putting channels and categories. They all kind of work differently, right? So like, can you be emotional in a line of copy on a Google search ad? Maybe, but it's like a listicle. You know what I mean? So um, I think it's like an unfair comparison to then, compare that to a 30-second or 60-second, video that you're watching in a cinema, for example, with really good sound and everything. Like, of course, you have more space to elicit emotions and more time to do so,
But I,
So
John,
I don't know, but
I could show you a single frame and you could cry. Yeah? And I could show you a single frame and you could be angry. We can elicit emotion with jet speed. And so if I show you a price, that could make you happy. If I show you a price, it could make you angry. So there is all ways of eliciting emotion, and it doesn't have to be the big anthem.
the big anthem in terms of like the emotional sort of Budweiser or award photo kind of ad, right? Taking on a story.
But we don't have to go that far, mate. Like, we can look at the series of Westpac ads that DDB produced that, are breaking up, like 90 seconds of a couple and the kid and that whole thing and asking ourselves, how did that help the brand? Or, NRMA at the moment, we're a help company. Um, you know, Help is rational, but what is the emotion? And the emotion in that category is anxiety. And are they lowering emotion? How are they lowering emotion? Even in a 6 second, social media spot, you can be lowering emotion, or you can be raising emotion, or you can, yeah, yeah. It's not. It's very shallow to think of, and it's very popular. And I love the fact that you've called it out. That people go, it's this false dichotomy that brand building, big emotion, performance marketing, purely rational.
And then, obviously there's, we got brand decay as well, memory decay that happens. Like, so there's a big, yeah, I mean, I get it from a status perspective, but I just find that people go, hey, brand on one side, performance on the other. Brand is there for a 60-second overproduced, video. Um, Therefore, that's the pinnacle of marketing effectiveness.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, well, there's a lot of other stuff to it, like point of purchase, distribution, product, packaging, lots of stuff.
I love. I've got an episode of Gruen where they talk about, and I consider Russell Howcroft one of my good friends. They talk about this fantastic emotional ad, and
Yeah.
they all lauder it, and it's just magnificent. And Russell talks about this is the longer form of advertising, and it's being lost, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then they show Bendigo Bank, and the host calls it banking shit or something like that. Now, the harsh reality is that Bendigo ad caused Bendigo Bank to grow above system for 18 months.
So the one that they're rubbishing on the show.
Yeah, and it won a gold Ogilvy. And there's only a few Australian brands to have ever won a gold Ogilvy. And the gold Ogilvy comes from the ARF, the Advertising Research Foundation in New York, and it's for a hugely effective creative that is based on insight.
Okay.
That's the Ogilvy Awards. And so what the creative fraternities talk about as being great work is not great work if it's not changing the brand's share.
Well, it could be good for their careers. I've seen the package. They get written up in Campaign magazine. They get invited to the Summer Awards show and blah 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 blah. It's like the standard sort of like I call it like consolation prize. If it wasn't commercially effective, it's like, hey, here, we'll make you look good. I just found people a bit simplistic about this. Like, for an advertising work, it has to be emotional. You're saying that, yeah, it helps for sure.
Yeah.
But some very rational things like a price can drive that emotion. Therefore, it's not all about a story-based emotional video, correct?
100%. How you elicit
Yeah.
the emotion, elicitation of emotion is an art. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That Kmart work that you talked about, now it's a long time ago, but it's a great example, because they brought in, the creative agency brought in a director from France that they closed that store, and at 10 o'clock, 100 mums went into that store, and they didn't stop filming until at 6 a.m. in the morning. And that director knows how to elicit emotion, knows how to capture the emotion. So it's a science, it's an art, and it's an underpinning of consumer choice.
It was super genuine, just for people who are watching or listening. Is when basically you had these mums come into Kmart and they're sort of all talking to each other, like pulling up products, like, oh, hey, this is pretty good. What do you think about this? And blah, blah. It's just like a normal shopping experience, basically, captured and then turned into a TV commercial. And that sort of like seeded the turnaround. And then obviously there was a lot of other product stuff. I think, you've written about this, but it was really interesting how channel it was, like in terms of like product. You had loss leader products coming in. You had a whole sort of like own brand that you created. I think, what do you call it, like an own brand or like a house brand or something?
Oh yeah, their home brand is now being sold to other organisations around the world.
Well, I mean, Costco did this with like Franklin, right? Like this is not a new concept. If you do it well, like good quality, standard quality, not overpriced, it sells well.
The marketers love the Kmart story for one reason, and that is that everyone in that business, that turnaround started in 2009. The actual, repurposing the stores and all that sort of stuff. The actual change in market share the green shoots started in 2011, and they really hit in 2014. Now, the difference,
Wow.
none of what marketing did would have been possible if Guy Russo had not have made all of those decisions about stripping back the number of SKUs and all that sort of stuff. But the cold, hard reality is that they made all of those changes and nothing happened. And it wasn't until Dion Workman came in, changed creative agency, changed marketing research firm, and developed that emotional-based campaign with the rational drivers of price and quality, and that marketing communications ran for probably about almost 5 years, and that's when the change came. And the paradox for Dion Workman was that he left the organisation at about the time that the change in market share was really exploding. And we see this a lot with CMOs, because the duration of CMOs is not as long as the cycle to change the brand often is.
Yeah, I know, which is, I've talked about this as well. It's like, yeah, by the time, if it's working well now, it's basically a predecessor.
Yeah, I've got a lot of I've got a lot of objective evidence of that. We've got lots of longitudinal diagrams where we've got the names of the CMOs, and we watch the market share, and we've seen the opposite. Like, we've seen poor CMOs come in and take over from amazing CMOs, and ride for like 3 to even 5 years on the past work.
And then they hop to the next one, and they're just lucky, and then they get known as being this really good CMO, and you're like, well, actually, you just kind of you're riding the coattails of other people's work. It's like, where's the incentive? You know what I mean? Like, there is no incentive, basically. So then you get these kind of like incompetent people. Then, yeah, and I'm there in the audience as these people that I know, have just not good at what they do. They're on the award shows, they're on the panel discussions at festivals and stuff like that. And I have to like break it to people that actually, that are sitting next to me. Hey, that person's actually doesn't know what they're talking about. But yeah, it's funny how that works. Hey, okay. So if people are interested then more in reading some of your work, I mean, I've read some of the papers. I know you've been published in proper journals as well. Where would you recommend they go to?
I think Green Book is a
Green Book.
US blog, and I have about 50 papers on Green Book.
Okay.
And yeah, I think that, yeah, but Forethought's website has a lot of that as well. And brandcoms.ai also has got the more contemporary stuff around Gen AI and what it's doing.
Interesting, yeah, because I'm doing some work personally with that right now, which is well, setting the foundational layer around data governance within an organization to then use AI on internal assets and that kind of thing, which is generally the step that's missed. And yeah, it's really interesting. And one of my other friends did an AI course that it's kind of all about prompting, and I find a lot of people they don't know how to use AI properly, therefore, and they have these really high expectations. They go in, oh, AI didn't work. I'm like, well, it also doesn't have all the background specific to your brand or what you actually want.
Oh,
So there's a
you're
bit of a training
100%.
process there. You know what I mean? Like to set it up. Yeah, yeah. And so this Coca-Cola ad that was done with AI. What are your thoughts on that, just topically?
That Coca-Cola spot was a great piece of Gen AI, but are they the drivers of choice? So if we're not careful, Gen AI will just replicate what advertising, the creative fraternity, have been doing for forever, and that is, someone creative coming up with a big idea and getting a client to spend money on it without understanding what the drivers are of category. So the big opportunity for Gen AI is to develop your content store. And in the content store are the category drivers, are the distinctive assets, are all of the components that make up a successful ad. And then Gen AI doesn't go to the large language model algorithm doesn't go to the general population. It goes to the content store first, and it creates ideas, concepts, spots that are aligned to consumer behaviour, and that is the frame breaking difference for creative agencies. If they can't make that leap now, I don't know what their future is. I'm not sure what their future is. Russell Howe on a panel asked me recently, by 2030, what proportion of advertising did I think would be Gen AI based? And I said 100%. And he was a bit shocked, but I still say that. I think by 2030, 100% will be Gen AI.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, maybe they'll supplement some actual shoots, but I mean, you don't need to. It's so expensive to do a shoot now. It's like, and the model's getting so good, so realistic that it's like, it's crazy what's possible now.
Yeah, I think that there's a real important point here. Ask yourself, how many carriage manufacturers in the world transition to making cars? The answer is one. Holden. Holden is the only one in the world. It was making saddles, and it transitioned to making engines and cars. No other one. There's a discussion that Studebaker kind of did it, but they didn't. But we can go through category after category. The like, ask yourself, how long did it take Blockbuster to go from 9,000 stores in the US to one? And the answer is 10 years. How long did it take for once the telegram was established from the north to the west coast of America? How long did it take for the Pony Express to go out of business, which delivered urgent messages in 10 days? The answer is 2 days. So 10 years, 2 days. How long do you think Gen AI will take to impinge into the creative area to the point where it becomes uneconomical for most creative agencies? And I think that if we're in 2025 and we're heading for 2030, I think 5 years is realistic, particularly given, as you said, there's about 20 effective large language models. Forget ChatGPT 4.0, there's about 20. And the work that we do is based on 6. So we use a symphony of large language models. We use one just for accent, for example.
Okay, cool. Well, I definitely want to maybe do another episode on Gen AI. That'd be very interesting. The forefront of sort of what's happening. But
Love to.
I'm just conscious of time, but I want to talk more. But I've got another appointment. Let's talk again soon. But thanks very much for your time, Ken. Really appreciate it, and hopefully answers a lot of questions around emotions for some people. And if it doesn't, maybe we can ring you back onto the show. Really appreciate your time.
Anytime. Good on you, John. Good to see you again. Thank you.